just a few moments before we take a sort of short break before the lecture, just to open up to see if there are any questions. I wonder if I can go to Kath first, just to see if anything has cropped up in the chat, Kath.
We have got a couple of questions, Dan. I'm not sure. One of them I think is going to take rather longer than 5 minutes to address, but
okay.
I will read them out to you anyway. We've got one from Andrea Casajuana. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Andrea. She says, data quality in policing can be really poor. Is there a way of mitigating or addressing this as part of the programme? Or guidance as how we can gain access to broad databases within our organisations?
So short answer is yes, and you'll learn a little bit about something called synthetic data and some other of the methods that we use that basically deal with, because the NHS is the same. We have lots of issues with data. It's a common thing, but there's actually stuff that you can do, and we'll show you the AI-based stuff that basically allow you to make up data that is a good approximation of your real data without it actually being real data. And we'll talk a little bit, there'll be some training sessions on that. So yeah, don't worry about that. There are things we can do about
that. Second question from Andrea. We get any qualifications in coding or modelling as part of the learning?
No, not at this time. So we're not an accredited course in that way. So you won't get a kind of formal qualification. It is more about your sort of developing your skills. Unfortunately, this time, I mean, that's something that we may want to explore in the future. I have to be honest. I think if we went down that route, we may end up having to have a charging model, which we're trying to avoid. We need to get money in somehow for HSMA, and I'm hoping that we can do that in the way of somebody providing some funding to allow us to make it bigger, as opposed to starting to charge people for this course. But yeah, it's a good point. Not at the moment, unfortunately. No, not for this program.
And from Taylor, no, will the training days be on a set day?
Yeah, so you'll see in the application pack this afternoon, most of the training days are initially on Tuesdays. So Tuesday is the main training day this year. I think Wednesdays are the learning set meetings for phase 2. But you should be aware that because there are all these option sessions, so once you start getting into sort of November and December time, you'll see there are 3 sessions a week, or 3 days a week of training. That's because we'll be offering the option sessions. So I mean, great if you can come along to all that, fantastic. We did have that before with some of the HSMAs, but so the day will depend on which sessions you're coming along to, essentially. But mostly it's Tuesdays. There are a couple things early in the training, a couple of core sessions which fall outside of that, usually on a Thursday, and sometimes it's just a Thursday morning, a little additional training. But you'll see all of the dates, and all the dates are fixed in. They are locked in dates. The content itself may change in case there are any sort of changes to any of the university teaching commitments, some of the trainers, but I'm doing most of the training myself and I don't have any of those commitments, so most of it should remain, but certainly the dates themselves will not change, so that'll help you pre-plan for
that. Got a couple of other questions come through from Anya Strakiena. How is HSMA commissioned?
So if you're referring to the funding, so basically at the moment, this is PENARC, our organisation, is funded by the National Institute of Health Research, and part of our remit is not only doing research, but capacity building as well. And so at the moment, this is internally funded essentially by PENARC funding. I think as we grow, that needs to change, and that's something that we've spoken about. We need to try and look at funding opportunities to try and allow us to sustainably grow, but that's not something for you guys to worry about at this stage. So maybe if we can hold off on any questions, if anybody can stay around sort of after the session, I'll try and address them there. But if we don't get a chance, then we will certainly send out the answers to you. I did say a few things about payment. Just to emphasise, this course is completely free of charge for all of you. There's no cost other than your time. It's basically, that's what we need, your time investment, which hopefully will be a worthwhile one. So yeah, please don't worry about that. I also saw something about what would happen if you were to miss something. The lectures that we put up, whilst we do need you to come along to the live sessions, because you'll need to partake in the exercise, etc. If there was something that happened and you weren't able to make it, we do put up videos from the lectures, etc. So you can catch up from most of it and work with your groups to catch up on that as well. So
I have one quick question, if you don't mind, just very quickly. I was one of the cohorts that did the NHS England Demand and Capacity program with the program that referred me to this course, actually, to this to this training.
Oh, okay.
And basically, one of the things that I stumbled, because they have developed, as you know, different models for demand and capacity, which are very useful. But one of the things that I stumble is when I try to implement those with the services, I realized that there's needed to be a development process for them to assimilate and understand those models. Mm-hmm. So it's very useful that we can build and create the models, but the audience that are in need of those mm-hmm. are not, I cannot put it in a different way, are not literate enough,
yes,
technologically talking, to work their ways around it. And they get slightly lost when you start telling them, oh, you need to do this with the data, you need to input here, even though it appears simple to us who have developed the model or who are familiar with it. If you are talking to a team leader who is a Band 5, who is a district nursing, or a team leader who is managing care coordinators to complete their referral to treatment for psychological therapies or whatever, I realized that I had to stop doing what I was trying to do and spend more time with them, trying to identify at what level they were. Yes. In order to move them into the modeling. So I think there is a bit of a gap. That's what I'm trying to say, in yes. between us creating these models, which are extremely useful and great, and then handling them to the people who are going to run them.
Yes, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. And so one of the things that we talk about in very early on within the HSMA program, one of the early sessions is actually all about engaging with people involved in the project, both in terms of sort of external stakeholders, but also, people that are going to be making the decisions on this, because you're absolutely right. They're not going to, you can't just show them, oh, look at this Python code that I've written and expect that they're going to understand that.
Yeah, no.
So there's things that you can do as a modeler that we will talk about in the training, but that allow you to try and build trust and credibility in what you're doing. So they may not understand the technical details of what you've done, but that they can understand what it is that, i.e. the system that you're modeling and what the approach that you've taken. And so actually a really important part of being a modeler, you will find is actually communicating with people who are not experts in this field, and making sure that the results of the models that you are conveying are not misunderstood and they're understood in context. I mean, we've all seen essentially that's happening on a national scale right now with the pandemic, in that people are trying to convey complex modeling information to the public, and people are not attuned to that kind of thing, and nor should they be. So there's all sorts of ways in which you need to consider how. I mean, I always say that in many ways the modeling's the easy bit. It's actually how you communicate that information, and how you make sure that you've built that sort of trust and credibility that can be quite challenging. But it's a really good point. Thank you. So there's a number of hands up, so I'll start moving through them in order. So Richard, I think you put your hand up first. You had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. It was just a quick one. It was just regarding the project. Mm-hmm. I'm just kind of thinking in my head about what kind of priorities or what things might be important for the ambulance service that I work for. Mm-hmm. And therefore was thinking with the kind of collaborative approach, with the 7 or 17 teams that are going to, well, sort of team leaders, their project will go forwards, which means then I guess you've got circa 15 other sort of HSMA participants who will be assisting with that. Does that mean then really we need to consider projects that will not require, that doesn't require data that's really not externally available, or would require excess bureaucracy such as letters of access or research passports or something else?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a good question. So it depends on what you're doing, and I mean the big thing I would say whenever, so obviously historically the research work we've done with the NHS, most of the data that we've obtained has been sort of pseudo-anonymized before we even get to it, because actually a lot of the data that you need for modeling often isn't the kind of sort of patient identifiable data that you have at the kind of start point. So there are potential ways around that if you're sharing with others from other organizations. It depends what you're trying to do. And so to give an example, one of my mentor groups for the current round, we've got a GP who is looking at patient note information, which obviously contains highly confidential information. The other team members obviously can't directly access that data, but what they've been able to do is to build up various algorithms that can then be used by the GP on that data, so they can use it on test sets, and then get him to apply that to the real data. So there are ways in which you can sort of get around that, even if the data itself can't be sort of easily transferred. In some cases, those kind of agreements have been set up. So we've got another group in our current cohort that have basically just set up data sharing agreements, because they're working both with the provider and with the commissioner, and so they've both got sort of different interests in that data, but a sort of common interest in the model. And so they set up an agreement to facilitate that. So it very much depends on the project, but there are lots of ways around it, is the key thing to say. And usually in the teams, you kind of split up into taking different aspects of it. So not all of you will be working on the actual sort of final data, if you like.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I mean, I've had some experience with generating synthetic data sets based on real data, but actually it's good to hear that, depending on the question, that there is a potential for going down the whole kind of data sharing route as well. No, Grant, yes. Thanks, Dan.
No problem at all. Jack, I think your hand went up next.
Hi, yeah, thanks very much. It was a really informative session. I had just a couple of questions, but the main question I didn't think out ahead about this was basically, I mean, the program seems really suitable for kind of what I'm doing and what I'm looking at, but at present I have an honorary contract with a CCG, but I'm a PhD student at the moment. So I was just wondering, before I exert my energies for the application, would I be eligible or considered, or like, is it worth applying anyway, or?
Yes. So the easy answer to that is yes, and this goes for anyone. As long as you've got a foot in the door in some way of working for a health, social care, or policing organisation, then that will count. So yes, you would be eligible for that. We have had previous people, the PhD students before, who haven't had that, and we can't accept their eligibility, unfortunately, for that. But as long as you've got some working relationship where you are part of an organisation, health, social care, policing organisation, and you can do so, it would be that organisation that you would need to do the project work for if you were taking for the project. But yes, you would be eligible for that.
Okay, thanks. And one kind of more interesting question I was wondering is, I was just wondering, like, how you would measure the success or the goal of like a given project. Like, how would you know, yes, this has worked, or no, this hasn't worked? Like, what is the translational sort of ambition for individual projects and given the organizations where they are?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess that goes back to, I mean, there's a whole minefield around implementation science. I mean, we've got a whole team within the ARC that actually looks at issues around that. So from our perspective, so for HSMA specifically, and I mentioned this a couple of times, but it's actually really important to remember is that the projects are the HSMA. So we provide the training, and we facilitate and guide, but ultimately the projects and their success or otherwise are are down to the HSMAs and their organisations and how that works. And sometimes things don't work. We've had projects before where through no fault of the HSMAs, it's just not worked, or the question they went in with, it just turns out it's not the right question, and that's okay. Those are the things that happen. And I think as long as along that way that there's been an increase in skills and exposure to these kinds of methods amongst the within the organization, I think that for us is a success. But I think in the majority of cases, one of two things happens: either the project directly sort of achieves what it was supposed to, and you get it answers the question or questions that were posed, or it doesn't, but it's opened up a new way of working for the organization. So we had from HSMA 2018, we had Simon, you saw in the video right at the start. So Simon, as a result of so he did that AI surgical cancellation stuff, and basically the outcome of that, he did some brilliant work on it, but the outcome didn't work. It just didn't work. It was and you'll find that if you do some AI stuff, that maybe you haven't got it, and it may be that you haven't got the data to be able to. He's essentially trying to replicate somebody called Ian and what he was deciding in machine form, and the conclusion was that maybe we just don't have enough information about what Ian is doing to be able to do that successfully at this stage. But on the back of that, his trust set up a brand new role heading up an operational research team, and he now does that within his trust. So the project may have been, it was certainly interesting, it was informative and sort of experimental, but it had a much wider impact. And for us, that was perhaps even more important, that he's now sort of leading a team within the trust, doing stuff that they'd never considered before. So I think that's there are all sorts of ways in which the project work might impact, and it may not necessarily just be sort of answering the question, I guess.
Okay, thank you very much. That's great.
No problem at all. So Agni, I think
yes,
you were next.
Yeah, that's correct. Hi, I have a quick question, couple of questions. So what is the smallest data set that we can deploy the artificial intelligence? So are we talking about the thousands of items on the database, or how is it robust if I have 600 people profile on the database, and it has got obviously so many other data sets about individual profile? Is that enough to deploy the artificial intelligence for a prediction model?
Okay, so it's a good question, and it's kind of impossible to answer because it very much depends on what it is you're trying to do and the particular data set you've got. What I would say is, don't worry too much about things like that. So I'll give you an example. So one of the projects for the current round of the HSMA program, they are looking at patient survey data using natural language processing to basically try and automatically analyze how patients feel about virtual outpatient clinics in Cornwall. Okay, so they're using all sorts of AI methods to do that. Now they've got they've got a decent amount of data. I think it's about 700 to 1,000 records. I think so. It's quite a decent amount. But what they're also able to do is they can train their model using their own data, but they can also train it using external data sets. So for something like sentiment analysis, for example, which is where you're trying to decide whether a piece of text is positive or negative, you can use an external data set to do the initial training. So you might, in the teaching, you'll see that we talk about the Internet Movie Database data set. There's a big data set of movie reviews that people have posted, and you can train your initial algorithm on that. You can say, here are some examples of things that people are saying, giving positive and negative reactions to, and you can use that to do the kind of initial training, and then you can do something that is transfer learning, where you say, okay, well, that's learned all of the the kind of common things that will be common to all language, but maybe there's something specific about our particular data, and so then we can train it we can add to that training using a much smaller data set, that we have that will then start to pick up some of the nuances about our particular data. So yeah, there are ways around that, depending on what your data is, and how it works. And it also depends, entirely on whether it's almost more about the balance of things in your data than about the quantity. So to give you another example, one of my mentees got very excited the other week, and anybody that comes onto the program and does anything on AI, you'll probably go through the same thing, that he was trying to predict whether patients were about to be admitted into hospital, and he built an AI, a machine learning algorithm. I said, "Oh my god, this is amazing! It's got 96% accuracy. It's right 96% of the time. That's fantastic!" And he got very excited until he realised that in his data, only 4% of patients were admitted, which means that the machine basically just learned to say, no, they're not going to be admitted for everyone. And of course, it would be right 96% of the time. But of course, that's completely useless because it's that 4% that you're interested in. So what he's looking at now is various methods to try and help rebalance the data and to deal with the data imbalance, to try and get a more useful approximation of that machine learning. So yeah, don't worry too much about the quantity. There are ways around things, and lots of methods that we can use, and even to create, as I mentioned before, about synthetic data, so you can actually create new data points that are completely made up, based on real data, but that are so good that a machine is fooled into thinking, and in fact a human is often fooled into thinking that it's real data. So there's lots of ways around small data sets.
Okay. And how long does it take for AI to learn?
Again, depends on what you're doing. So if you've got a depending on the scale of what the problem that you're looking at, the data and what it's trying to learn, and also depending on the computer specs you've got available to you. So I mentioned earlier about having sort of GPU facilities and stuff. So if you've got a decent GPU that either you've got at home or you can use a online cloud service, you can chuck this out, you can get some really quick stuff coming out. So but equally you can also have our colleague Mike does a lot of stuff where he leaves his computer on for several days just to get it to learn. So it varies enormously. But you can certainly do. The key thing to say is that machine learning has evolved to the point at which it is now accessible to anyone. So people can now use this either on their own computers. We've now got commercial equipment, domestic equipment that you can buy, in terms of graphics cards and things like that actually can do this really well, or there are cloud services available that allow you to anyone to access very high performance computing that can do this kind of thing. So we, particularly in the last sort of 5-10 years, we've moved on hugely in terms of that aspect.
Wonderful, thank you very much.
No problem at all. So I think, was it Alam? Sorry, is it Alam or Jahinga?
Sorry. Yeah, that's it. Thank you, Daniel.
No problem.
First of all, thank you for your presentation. It was very good and clear to understand what's going to be happening in that course. I have 2 questions about the course. The first of all is like, if I haven't been accepted for my project, so you said even though I can join the training if I join the training, so what gonna be my contribution? Because I'm gonna work on someone project, so it's gonna be like on coding base or in a whole thing, because they're gonna be like few people, like say 10 people in a group and working in a team, so they're gonna be split according to their background, which thing we're gonna perform there.
So it depends entirely on the project manager and what that project manager wants from their team. So the way one of the teams has done it this time is that they've basically got a number of people in that team who are like really good at certain aspects of coding. So they've set them off to do particular things on that project around that play to their strengths, basically. So they've each sort of carved out little roles. And I mean, another thing to say is that it may be that you're working on somebody else's project if your project doesn't get it through, but you may find that in the process of doing something and practicing those skills that you've been taught, that actually the kind of skills that will then help you to undertake your project separately, because although you can kind of pick which team you want to join if your project doesn't make it. So you may say, well, look, although this project is not of direct relevance to my organization, the thing that I wanted to do with my project involved, I don't know, natural language processing. So if I were to get involved in that project, in that aspect, I could then use those skills for my own work outside of the HSMA program. So there's also that kind of aspect of it, and a number of people have done that. We've got somebody whose project didn't make it through, but has joined another project, and they joined that particular project because it was using the same method they planned to use for their project. So it helped them to develop those skills and to apply those skills in that they could then translate into what they were hoping to do as well. So.
Oh, thank you. So there's an opportunity to choose a project, like when a project gonna be selected. So I can express my interest, which one I want to get involved. Yes. So okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, and the last question is like the Python and R. So it's like nowadays Python is occupied everything, but I work a little bit in R. So from that point of view, I'm just interested on that the Python. So we're going to use the both thing to just do the modeling thing, or basically it's going to be the Python.
It'll be predominant. Almost all of it will be Python, but we do have some R training. So full disclosure, Sean is our R trainer. He likes R. Mike and I hate R. But having said that, there are a lot of the things that you can do in Python, you can also do in R. So if you've got the skills to be able to do that in R, and some people do prefer R, and we've had people like that who've come through the HSMA program before, and they've learned about the things in Python, but said actually I prefer R. So now I've got those sort of basics because I know how that structure works. I can then use the equivalent R package to do that. So you'll get most of the R stuff in the HSMA training is you get some sort of basic R training, and then Sean focuses a lot of it around a lot of the sort of common analytical functions that frankly are often done in Excel at the moment, and showing you how a much better way of doing that using R. But most of the stuff we teach you is Python based, but that shouldn't stop you. If people do prefer R, they are more than welcome to do that, and you will have a bit of training in R as well. So.
Okay, so we're gonna have it is like what level of training in a Python training, say, is gonna be like beginner or intermediate, or what level?
So we start from first principles. We assume that you haven't even touched a programming language before in your life. That's where we start from. So we start
from the scratch.
Absolutely from scratch. So we start talking about programming, the basic concepts of programming, and then we show you how to build that up in Python. Now it's quite a quick, rapid curve, because obviously with this we're going from you knowing nothing to you being able to develop AI in less than 3 months. But it seems to work, and I think it's because we very much focus a lot of the teaching around the core skills, around the kind of things that are going to be relevant for what you're trying to do. So we teach the basics and then focus in on the key things that you will need to know. And of course, you get lots of practice in terms of, you have, I think it's about 20 hours of Python training, and then all of the things that we then teach you, like we teach you a package called SymPy, which is for discrete event simulation in Python. You then get to practice Python. We show you things in SymPy called generator functions, which are things in Python that are really useful in SymPy. So you start to learn about little extra bits as well as you go through the rest of the course.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Daniel.
No worries at all. So I think we've probably got time for another couple of questions we've got left. So Matt, I think you were next.
Hi, yeah, sorry. What kind of weighting, I'd written, what kind of weighting do you tend to assign to clinicians as applicants, assuming there's some technical aptitude there? So I know a little bit of Python, for example, but I'm not
Right.
I'm not an analyst, and I could hear that, this might be pitched at analysts, but not exclusively. Just, I can understand the value that it might add to have certain people on the call,
Yeah.
certain areas, so locales, but generally in previous programs, I guess what I'm trying to get at is how likely is it to that a clinician will be successful in applying?
Oh, you stand equally a good chance as anybody else. So we've had, you saw Rohan in the video at the start, that he was a junior doc. I say we've got a GP from this cohort. If you've got experience in Python before, then that's good, because that shows us, yeah, okay, my current role may not be analytical, but I've got a bit of background in this. I know some of the skills that you'll be teaching, and the most important thing for us is to know that this is something you want to do, and this is something that you're interested in. So as long as you've got, the fact you've got a bit of experience in Python tells us a lot, because even though you're not in an analytical role, you're going to be able to do the sort of things that we can that we will be teaching, and you'll be able to sort of pick up on that. So yeah, don't let that put you off at all. Indeed, some of our best HSMAs have not come from analytical backgrounds in many cases, but just have a raw sort of interest and passion for it, and that natural flair. And really, it's that natural flair we're looking for, and that can be difficult to know, even yourself, whether you've got it. But if you've got clues like, I've got a bit of experience in Python, then it gives you a bit of a better sense about whether it's something you would enjoy, that kind of thing. So
okay, that's great, thank you. And sorry, just quickly as well, have you had any significant barriers that come up with having trusts release people off the program?
No, not really. So I think mostly so it's a really good question, because when we first started HSMA, we did the pilot program, Martin and I went around to all of the kind of chief execs of the local area, and we thought we were going to get laughed out of the house. We thought they were going to turn around and say, I can't release somebody for a day a week for a year, are you mad? Yeah. And actually they were completely on board with it. They said that isn't an issue at all. They wouldn't have to, they said if you were asking for money, we would struggle. But the fact you're asking for time, but we can see a real return on that investment, we had no issue at all. And I think that's, there'll always be cases where people do have that kind of issue, but I'm just thinking back, and we really, there are issues where people get sort of sidetracked, and big things come up, and it becomes more difficult for them to work on their projects for a while. But that usually resolves, and that's part of the reason why you've got your workplace supervisor, who's there to help you say, no, I do need that time carved out. This is important. What we're doing something very important for the organization. So it hasn't been anywhere near as much of an issue as we thought it would have been at the start. I think it's fair to say, and usually it's people that we lose in the program, it's usually because they've moved on, they get promoted, and they've gone off to another job. But so yeah, it's mostly people that drop out, or people that drop out in the first few months because they just realize it's not for them, and that's fine too.
Okay, that's great, thank you.
No problem. So last question, just from Thomas.
Hi. Yeah, I think you probably partially answered my question with Matt's question there, but it's about the time commitment. So the course looks great. It's exactly the kind of thing I'm interested in, and I can see the value to me personally. But given the time commitment of a day a week for a year, that's probably going to be a bit of a problem with my line manager and the trust. So is there any way you could suggest I could demonstrate the value of this course to those people?
So it would be worth checking out the information on our website about some of the previous projects that we've done within the Pencore team, for example, and we can send you a link to that, because actually that's the kind of stuff that you're looking at doing, and it's the impact that for the service and for patients that operational research and data science can have, that I think is the real selling point. And I think that was probably the reason why we got so much buy-in locally, because we'd already, I think we were going about 2 years 2-3 years maybe before we sort of started thinking about HSMA in earnest, and we built up that people knew what operational research was a bit more in the Southwest because we've been starting to work with them and showing them the benefits. So it's being able to see that the sort of stuff that this can do, and so if only we could do this, look at what would happen. I think it's improved in the NHS over the last few years. I think there's been a lot more awareness centrally as well. I think there's a lot more of a push for people to be upskilled in things like Python and R and looking at modeling. So I think it's starting to filter through, and things like AFA, where you've got the Association of Professional Healthcare Analysts, the analytical function becoming more visible and seen as more important, quite rightly so, within NHS organisations. So I think it's getting there, but I think the most convincing argument you can give is in terms of previous impact, and as I say, we can show you some examples from our own work that show you the kind of stuff you can do with that. I think that's probably the best thing you could do, I think, for this.
Okay, right, thanks.
No problem. Okay, we better close off there, but thank you everyone for staying behind, and I hope I've managed to answer your questions. If there is anything else that crops up, then please do get in touch. We'll happily answer your questions. Otherwise,